So in leading up to this section, the very beginning of our section talks about the Glorious Revolution. And the question is, what is the Glorious Revolution? So briefly, in the 1600s, we said that there were many countries that were giving kings absolute power. And in Europe, so in France, in Russia, in Prussia, which is modern-day Germany, we see leaders in Spain gaining absolute power. In England as well, but in England, they handle it much differently. They were not historically used to a king with absolute power. And when a king decides that he's going to take absolute power, this is something that's going to bother Parliament. Now, Parliament is England's version of Congress. Elected officials, or maybe not elected, but chosen officials who meet to make laws for the country. And it all kind of goes back to King Henry VIII, changing the religion. His daughter Mary dies without a son. And the next son the next person to come take over is from Scotland. Okay, and this king is going to take absolute power in a way that the people of England themselves are not used to having it be. So when this man tries to cut off Charles I, when he tries to cut off Parliament and its power to levy taxes, the king didn't have power to get taxes. Parliament says, no, you can't do that. And he says, you know what, just, you're done. There is no more Parliament. And they have a war, and the king is hung. He is killed. Okay, this is really something that the people of England still regret to this day. The leader of the parliamentary forces was a guy named Oliver Cromwell. When Cromwell becomes king, he eventually tries to consolidate his own power because he doesn't like having to work with Parliament. It's much easier as a ruler if you don't have to work with anyone else. You can just do whatever you want. But eventually he dies, and they put King Charles's son back in power as king. Okay, but the problem is that Charles's son is Catholic. Or he's not, he's Catholic friendly. And on his deathbed, I think he converts to Catholicism. The next king will be James II, who is straight Catholic. And James II starts firing Protestants. Okay, he starts firing Protestants in his government, and this makes the Protestants mad. And then he has a son, okay? And the Protestants say, oh, well, we could have stuck it out with this Catholic king for a few years, but if he's going to give it to his son, and now we have decades and decades potentially of this Catholic ruling, no. So the Protestants invite a guy named William Orange who married the king's daughter, the former king's daughter. So she is related to that royal family, to come and take power. He does. They call it the Glorious Revolution because there's very little blood spill in England, although in Scotland and in Ireland, who weren't happy about this, because remember, this is a Scottish king and the Irish are Catholic, so for whatever reasons, they're willing to fight hard. There is war going on up there, but in England proper, there is not. Okay, and they say to him, they'll listen, William of Orange, which is actually the Netherlands. They say, you can come and be our king and we'll support you, but you have to sign this Bill of Rights, right? And that's where we pick up, because the Bill of Rights guarantees certain rights to Englishmen that the king could not take away. It also allows Parliament a lot of power. Now, one thing about England today, you might know, they still have a queen, they still have a monarchy, but they have no power. Parliament is all the power. And this was really not the beginning. I mean, in 1215, the signing of the Magna Carta was the beginning of kings giving up a little power in England, but this is the beginning of kings giving up a lot of power to Parliament in England. And he agrees and he signs the Bill of Rights. And this is the Glorious Revolution. Okay. We know that a lot of these ideas in the English Bill of Rights come from John Locke, who was an Enlightenment thinker. And I'm going to now get to the American Revolution. So, one thing here that we know is that because of the 7 Years' War, the English then ask the Americans, the colonists, to pay a little bit of tax to help pay for that war. Wars are very expensive. And the colonists say no. They say, look, we will not pay your taxes unless we get a seat at the table in Parliament. We want political representation. And the king said, no, you guys are colonists. You don't get a seat at the table. So now there's tension back and forth. There's issues with, first they try and tax stamps, and the colonists refuse to do it. And then they try and tax, molasses, which is like syrup. And the colonists aren't going to put up with that either. They kind of find ways to make their own. And England's having a hard time getting them to pay their taxes. Then, of course, comes the Boston Massacre, where a bunch of protesters show up in Boston. The English open fire on the protester. Spoiler alert, anytime that a leader opens fire on protesters, it causes that leader a lot of problems. So things settle down for a while until England then passes the Tea Act, which gives a tax to the English on tea. And tea is a very popular drink in England today. It was very popular back then. I know in America, we're kind of coffee people, and we're like, tea, what? Who cares? Tax me. But there was a lot of tea to drink back then. It was kind of like the coffee, right? So if there was a tax put on coffee in America, people would be like, what? Because a lot of people drink daily a few cups of coffee, or at least a cup of coffee in the morning. So the colonists dress up, they throw the tea from a boat in the Boston Harbor into the ocean. England then passes a bunch of laws that are called, colonists call the Intolerable Acts. This has to do with, in part, sending soldiers there to stay in their houses. All the while, the Americans are meeting, trying to figure out how they're going to get rid of the English in Philadelphia. And this is called the First Continental Congress. In spring of 1775, the English sent groups of soldiers to try and take the weapons that they had left in the forts in Concord, Massachusetts. Fighting starts between the colonists and the English. No one knows who fired first. Either way, now we're having a Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia, 1775. The colonists try to make peace with the English government. And the English government responds by saying, okay, we're going to hire some soldiers from Germany or Prussia, and we're going to send them in there. One thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the English soldiers in the American Revolution were not English, but were Prussian. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence is written by Thomas Jefferson. It's sent as a letter to the King of England, and it declares independence. Okay, and now we're going to have a war between England and America, and the details of the war you'll get into as in next year in your U.S. history class. But the bottom line is that within the Declaration of Independence were Enlightenment ideas, okay? We know that Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin hung out in France. They went to these salons with the philosophes, and they and they learned a lot of Enlightenment ideas. When they came back to America, they used those ideas in the government. My gosh, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness sounds a lot like John Locke's Life, Liberty, and the Protection of Property. Americans get some help from the French in a naval blockade to defeat the English, and the Americans eventually defeat the English. Now the question is going to be, what are you going to do? You got your independence, now what? And what we're going to find is that the colonists are going to try and use Enlightenment ideals in their government, okay? And we're going to find out that we are the first country, we're not the first country in the world to use these ideas. We're the first country in the world to use these ideas and have them stick. And that's where we end up.